perspective she's brought today on our work. And I think she would like to talk mainly about the challenges faced by the working classes, be it in the urban sector, rural sector. The urban sector actually is what itself I will focus on more later. So may I invite you, you can either come here or feel more comfortable, you could speak from there. And I guess about 10 minutes would be okay.
Yeah.
And then,
my paper is on how changing economic relations and caste equations affect men and masculinities. Men and masculinities in relation with economic status and caste have been changing with the inevitable historical changes taking place in the caste mode of production under the domination of the ever-developing capitalist mode of production. Changes in men and masculinities have taken place with these changes in these modes in various historical periods. In the early period, in the traditional caste system based on Jajmani and Balutidati, each caste was supposed to do the work assigned to it by the caste division of labor. There was a hierarchical relation in which among these castes, in which the lower caste at the bottom, such as the untouchables, bonded laborers, was supposed to do work which had the highest level of dirtiness, manual labor, and the least amount of mental labor. As one goes up the hierarchy, the intensity and percentage of manual labor and dirtiness of labor goes on decreasing, and the share of mental labor goes on decreasing. And so the highest caste is supposed to do pure mental labor, no manual work, and no dirty work. In this period, in this arrangement, women's participation in sustenance of the family was almost equal to men in all toiling castes. So this status of women gave them relatively more freedom vis-a-vis men. In the families of landlord castes and Brahmins, on the other hand, women's oppression was more intensive and freedoms were minimal. Because men from the upper two castes are supposed to have control over the sexuality of women, not only of women within their own families, but also women from the lower castes, their masculinities, along with their economic domination, were at the highest intensity. Even men in the toiling caste used to get justification for their caste slavery on the basis of acceptance of principle of hierarchy between men and women of their own caste. The whole hierarchical structure was legitimizing the principle of inequality, and so masculine behavior, masculine psychology, feeling powerful on the basis of masculinity. In the traditional structure based on Jajmani and Balutidati, space for assertion by women was more in the lowest caste. It went on decreasing with the caste hierarchy. The laboring caste women were participating in various economic activities of the family. They took a major role in social functions and also in decision-making. Male masculinity was not fed to the extent that it should have a single-handed patriarchal domination in the family function. So there's freedom to remarry after the husband has died, free to remarry after a woman got separated from her husband. These were there in all toiling castes, up to and including the farming castes, even in the period of British colonial rule in the early 20th century. As men started going to the cities, functioning as workers in the factories, their masculinity got blown up in such a way that they started behaving as a main controller of the family and bread earners. The fact that women remaining in the villages were rearing the future labor power, that is their children, and sustaining the family in a major way by doing agricultural labor, remained unseen by the men working in the cities as a factory working class, and even by women themselves. When women were working in the factories along with men, particularly in the old composite textile mills, more egalitarian relations were there between husband and wife. It is interesting to note that women in all toiling castes, up to the recent past, conversed with their husband in the first person singular, not in honorific language. With the growth of the capitalist mode of production and the changes in the nature of caste relations, Keeping the caste mode of production, Jajmani's system relating to caste jobs started getting into the process of disintegration. The labor power of all toiling castes became part of the generalization of labor power as a commodity. At the same time, things produced by the caste-related artisanry and farming started becoming part of the generalized commodity market. This enhanced the masculine character of men in a modern form. Monetary transactions and the activity in the labor and commodity markets got dominated by men, even though women continued to work in production processes outside the home, also, as well as in the home. Even while determining the value of labor power, gender factors started having a main role to play. For the same kind of work, the same kind of quality and quantity, women laborers started getting less wages than men. This started the emergence of new men laborers as the head of the family, more masculine than in the traditional caste system. Women in the early period were producing things like vegetables, fruits, leafy vegetables. They were growing poultry and rearing goats as economic activity and had an independent role in running the family. This started getting abolished with the monocropping of irrigated agriculture, with poultry becoming an independent business, and so goats and animal husbandry. So women's freedom and families belonging to the toiling caste started decreasing, and masculinities and male chauvinism started growing with these changes. In all toiling castes, there was a practice of bride price given to the woman's family because one laboring person from that family was going to the husband's family. So they paid a bride price for her. But this practice started getting abolished, and now the dowry system was on the rise, with women committing suicide and some incidents of bride burning. The emergence of new educated middle class among the lower castes increased the bloody contradictions in which killings of young men from lower castes started becoming a new, more inhuman and criminal way of caste domination and showing a violent masculinity. Imperialist globalization has further pushed women towards the so-called unorganized sector. Development of the IT sector, windmills, solar energy, and such renewable-based industries and highly automated modern industries have generated only a very small amount of employment. Whenever employment is made from foreign investment and national monopoly, gives job opportunities only in very small numbers. Young men are pushed out of the organized sector in this process. They do low-paid jobs in the unorganized sector and in outsourced production units. Women are the most affected section. They work as sweepers, rag pickers, trash and rag pickers, contract laborers in building and construction, agricultural laborers, and the like. This has created a new middle class with increased male chauvinistic and communal casteist ideology with the growth of their status in urban areas. In the rural areas which created capitalist landlords and capitalist landowners having connection of their products directly to the toiling market. This section is also shedding away the character of culture given to them as toiling castes by their old toiling caste membership, and they combine Western capitalist culture of commodification of women and their sexuality with casteist and communal ideology by embracing Brahmanism of a modern kind. On this background, we get caste contrias, honor killings, killings of lower caste youngsters for falling in love with young upper caste girls, rapes, and so forth. These become common and rampant. Women become an easy prey of this modern masculinity. This modern masculinity is revealing itself also in a more modern form, posing itself as men who are liberated from the old concepts of man and women relationships, but in practice, behind this curtain, they are treating women as commodities to be used and thrown away. They are the ones who are becoming self-declared protectors of the so-called great culture in the tradition of historical establishment. The struggle against all these new kinds of women's exploitation and oppression, heightened masculine domination, has to be of a very modern nature.
Speak from the other side.
Okay, thanks for that very sharp presentation and also for being punctual. I mean, for keeping the presentation within the time limit. That is now going to be even more important since now we have a full panel really. There are now 4 more presentations that we have to really fit into the schedule. So, may I now invite Mr. Datta Iswalkar to address us. He's, as the program document says, he's basically a trade unionist and who's been active for long in Mumbai and especially known for his work amongst the mill workers. You see, and so that is surely going to be the background to his presentation today. I think he would like to speak in Marathi. So, or Marathi is okay because Hindi also would not be understood by most people. So anyway, some kind of translation will be needed. So I guess I'll provide the translation. So you make your presentation and then very quickly I'll summarize it in English. Or if you feel you are very comfortable with Hindi, then that's okay because that way directly you'll reach out to many more people perhaps.
Hindi is preferable.
Huh?
Hindi is preferable.
Are you perfectly comfortable?
आज का जो विषय है खास करके जो क्लोजर होता है, कंपनी बंद होती है तो उसके परिणाम परिवार के ऊपर क्या होते हैं वो खास करके उसके ऊपर मैं बात करूँगा। और जो मैं जिस इलाके में और बम्बई में मैं काम करता हूँ तो टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री में हमारे यूनियन है उसके बारे में मैं थोड़े में कहूँगा। एक तो बात ऐसी है कि जब इंडस्ट्री बंद हो जाती है तो पहला परिणाम होता है तो परिवार के ऊपर उसका इफेक्ट हो जाता है और परिवार पे इफेक्ट हो जाता है इसका मतलब उनके बच्चे अगर पढ़ाई कर रहे हैं तो पहला इफेक्ट होता है तो बच्चों को शिक्षा के ऊपर होता है कि उनकी फीस है स्कूल में जाते हैं तो उनका क्या करे उनकी एक चिंता रहती है। दूसरी बात ऐसा है कि दूसरा एक मुद्दा एक आता है कि जबकि कारखाना या बंद होता है सैलरी तो बंद होता है तो खास करके मिल वर्कर्स में हमने देखा है कि जो महिला है घर में काम करती थी हाउस वाइफ थी उसको भी काम करने का घर के बाहर आके काम करना पड़ता है तो दोनों काम करते तो भी परिवार चलता है। तो आखिर होता है ऐसा कि जो परिवार में बच्चे रहते हैं उनको घर में ही काम करना पड़ता है और खास करके जो लड़की है उनको ज्यादा काम करना पड़ता है स्कूल में जाके भी क्योंकि पिताजी और माँ दोनों अगर काम पे गए हैं क्योंकि छोटा मोटा काम करते टेक्सटाइल मिलकर का आपको मालूम है 82 में जो स्ट्राइक हुआ तो स्ट्राइक तो सक्सेस नहीं हुआ और 1 लाख लोगों को रोजगार गंवाना पड़ेगा। तो 1 लाख लोग जो गांव में थे गांव में चले गए लेकिन मुंबई में थे तो छोटा मोटा काम करते वड़ा पाव का गाड़ी चलाते थे। तो दोनों परिवार में जो महिलाएं है वो भी आके काम करना शुरू किया तो घर में बच्चों के ऊपर बहुत परिणाम होता है। और दूसरा एक होता है कि जो लड़की होते है उसको भी ज्यादा काम करना पड़ता है कि माँ बाहर गई रहती है तो अपने जो कल्चर में है उसमें बच्चे के ऊपर ही परिणाम होता है। तो एक उस तरह हम लोग ये देखते हैं और दूसरा मैंने एक देखा टेक्सटाइल टाइप में हम लोग काम किए थे और बाद में भी टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री तो बंद हो गई थी ग्लोबलाइजेशन आया था सभी इंडस्ट्री मुंबई शहर में चली गई। लेकिन एक हम लोग ने जो लड़ाई की टेक्सटाइल मिल के अंदर इसमें एक था तो पहले हमारे था कि हमारे ड्यूज ज्यादा मिलना चाहिए अगर क्लोजर हो रहा है तो उसके लिए हम लोग लड़ाई। उस लड़ाई में भी मिल वर्कर्स जो महिला थे बड़ी तादाद में महिलाएं इसमें ज्यादा शामिल थी और संघर्ष भी कर रही थी। ऐसा नहीं कि केवल पीछे रह के ये करना नेतृत्व हमारे इसमें तो मीना मेनन गायत्री सिंह दोनों ही नेतृत्व कर रहे थे हमारे टेक्सटाइल मजदूरों का और भी महिलाएं थी तो जोर में काम करते थे। तो एक ऐसे मोड़ पे आए थे हम लोग कि जैसे टेक्सटाइल मिलें बंद हो रही है तो हम लोग को ज्यादा ड्यूज मिलना चाहिए वो एक लड़ाई थी। और दूसरी हमने एक नया लड़ाई उसमें ये किया था कि मिल मालिकों को जो जमीन दी गई है वो एक लीज के ऊपर दी गई थी एक उद्योग चलाने के लिए दी थी अभी उसका कन्वर्ट हो रहा है कि उनको मिले तो बंद हो रहे हैं। इसलिए हमने मांग किया था कि हमको इस जमीन का शेयरिंग मिलना चाहिए। और एक बड़ी लड़ाई उसमें होगी कि ये नई लड़ाई थी, उस तरह का ऐसा कभी हुआ नहीं कि उद्योग की जमीन मजदूरों को मिले। तो इसमें हमने देखा और इसमें हमने ये तय था कि उसमें हम घर बनाएंगे, जो भी जमीन हमें मिलेगी उसके ऊपर घर मिलेंगे। तो उसमें वो लड़ाई में हमने देखा महिलाओं का ये था, बहुत महिलाएं उसमें आई थी। यानी आज भी हम लोग मोर्चे निकालते हैं तो 70% महिला रहते हैं। तो इस तरह की लड़ाई इस बड़ी तादाद में वर्किंग क्लास की महिलाएं आने के बाद उसका सरकार के ऊपर बहुत असर हुआ। एक थोड़े में मैं एक ही कहानी कहूंगा कि हम लोग ने ऐसा किया था कि अशोक चौहान जब मुख्यमंत्री आए थे, नए आए थे, विलासराव चले गए थे, तो हम लोग ने सोचा था वो रिस्पॉन्ड नहीं कर रहे थे, जो हमारा कानून बन गया था उसको रिस्पॉन्ड नहीं कर रहे थे। तो हम लोग ने सोचा उनके बंगले के ऊपर हम लोग जो घुस जाएंगे और बड़ा मोर्चा निकालेंगे। तो हम लोग का ऐलान किया कि हम मोर्चा निकालना है, तो और वर्षा बंगले के ऊपर जाना है, उनके घर पर जाना है। तो पुलिस ने जरा बड़ी तादाद में हमको पहले दिन सब लोग को, हम लोग थे नेता लोग, कार्यकर्ता लोग, तो हमको पकड़ लिया। लेकिन हमारे महिलाओं ने एक बहुत अच्छा काम किया। हम तो बाहर जेल में थे और वो लोग ने ऐसे मीटिंग करके वो लोग ने 25 महिलाएं थी, हर एक जन एक टैक्सी किया और वो 25 महिलाएं 5 टैक्सी में वर्षा बंगले पर चले गए। तो तुरंत मेरे को पुलिस का फोन आया, अरे आपने क्या किया, महिलाएं कैसे आई? वैसे देखा तो महिलाओं को पुलिस ने उसको ये किया था, तो बोले ना हमारे उधर भगवान शंकर का मंदिर है, वहां हम जा रहे हैं। तो पुलिस को इतना ध्यान में नहीं आया। तो बाद में मेरे को सीनियर बोला और आने वाले है कि जरा कम करो, नहीं तो हमारी नौकरी चली जाएगी। तो उस तरह मेरा क्या कहना है कि ये जो महिलाओं की लड़ाई है, जो तादाद में हमारे गृहिणी मजदूर की लड़ाई, बहुत महिलाओं का ये है, उसमें सहभाग है। तो इस तरह हम लोग एक लड़ाई की और आज भी हम लोग कुछ हद तक जमीन भी पाए, 60-70 एकड़ जमीन तो हमको मिल रही है और घर भी बनाए हैं। तो जब भी मालिकों के बड़े टावर बन गए, उसके बाजू में हमारे भी छोटे छोटे टावर बन गए। 6-7 हजार तो घर मिले हैं और जो 6,000 चॉल्स में रहते थे, यानी एम्प्लॉय करके जो घर मिलते थे, वो घर भी 6,000 में, तो 12-15 हजार तो घर हम लोग ने पाए और भी ये लड़ाई शुरू है। तो एक लड़ाई है। और दूसरी मुझे लगता है कि मजदूर आंदोलन में हम काम करते हुए जो ग्लोबलाइजेशन के बाद 92-2000 तक हमने देखा कि इतना परिवर्तन आया शहर में, सभी कारखाने बंद हो गए, ट्रेड यूनियन कानून खत्म किए गए हैं, सेवा क्षेत्र में आज नौकरियां बढ़ गई है, सेवा क्षेत्र में नौकरियां मिलती है लेकिन नौकरी की कोई भी गारंटी नहीं, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लेबरिंग चल रहा है। इसके वजह से जितने भी नौकरियां मिलते हैं, लेकिन उनमें ये भी महसूस होता है कि मेरी नौकरी कभी भी चली जा सकती है। आपने जेट एयरवेज में देखा था एक तुरंत सब लोग को निकाल दिया था और सभी लोग फिर राज ठाकरे के पास गए थे हमको बचाव करके। तो आज जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लेबरिंग है और ट्रेड यूनियन मूवमेंट के सामने एक नया चैलेंज है ग्लोबलाइजेशन के बाद कि कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लेबरिंग को कैसे खत्म करे। और उसके वो चैलेंज आज ट्रेड यूनियन के सामने है कि आज नौकरी की सुरक्षा नहीं है, सेवा क्षेत्र में नौकरी बढ़ गई है। आज भी नया सरकार ने जो कानून लाया था, पहले कानून था कि 100 लोग अगर कोई कंपनी में काम करते हैं तो उनको सुरक्षा मिलती थी, अभी 300 का किया है। सही मानो तो अभी क्या हो गया कि टेक्नोलॉजी से वजह से लेबर फोर्स कम हो रहा है, तो उल्टा ऐसा बनना चाहिए कि 50 लोगों को भी सुरक्षा देनी चाहिए। उसने 300 को दिया तो किसी को भी सुरक्षा नहीं मिलेगी कि कारखाने में अभी लोग नहीं, जितने लोग नहीं होते थे, जैसे हमारे मिलों में पहले 15-15 हजार लोग काम करते थे, अभी वही जो 15 हजार लोग कपड़ा बनाते थे तो 500 लोग बना सकते हैं कि टेक्नोलॉजी बदल गई है। तो मुझे लगता है आज ट्रेड यूनियन मूवमेंट के सामने एक बड़ी चुनौती है, नए तरीके से ग्लोबलाइजेशन के सामने कैसे खड़े रहेंगे। और इसमें मुझे लगता है मुंबई जैसे शहरों में भी अभी महिलाएं हैं जो भी काम करते, सभी लोग इसमें आ जाएंगे और एक नया चैलेंज सभी को लेना पड़ेगा, तो ही ग्लोबलाइजेशन को हम लोग रोक सकते हैं। इतना मैं कहते हुए मेरा भाषण खत्म करता हूँ। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Dr. Ji. So basically, what he said was for those who do not follow Hindi. His basic reference point, of course, was the very famous historic struggle launched by mill workers in Mumbai. You know, the mills were the backbone of Mumbai's economy for over a century. And the mill workers were highly organized and really, I think, showed many characteristics of what, Marx classically considered to be the virtues of the proletariat. Anyway, this struggle unfortunately failed, and the mills were closed down, and surely the mill owners wanted exactly that, and further they wanted to now sell off the lands, etc., and make money out of it. So the workers, after this, the failure of the struggle, launched a twofold movement. One was to ensure that they get their dues, etc., compensation, and so on. And more importantly, I think, in a way, the struggle to get a share of the mill land for construction of houses, because that, as you know, is one of the biggest problems in Mumbai. And this is a central area of Mumbai, which has undergone gentrification, etc., but that's another story. Now, and he says, of course, one immediate effect of this strike and the subsequent, the failure of the strike was that the workers, now the ex-workers actually, families, were under tremendous economic pressure, and they had to find other avenues of, other ways of generating income, and surely that took them into the informal sector largely, in fact, with all the attendant problems. Women also were compelled to enter the informal sector and take up whatever jobs were available. The children then therefore were left to kind of fend for themselves on the home front, etc. So this was the scenario. And now he says that in the wake of globalization, there is a kind of de-industrialization, in the sense that the old sort of smokestack sector kind of industry has given way to the service sector. Okay, so yes, jobs are becoming available there, but those jobs are few, and above all, there is tremendous insecurity there. And there is no adequate legal protection available to workers in this sector. And this, he says, is really the major challenge now faced by the working class movement. Now, how we are going to really weave issues of masculinity into this kind of narrative is something I think that we can all collectively give a thought to, and then question answer session, you can ask specific questions. Okay, right. Now may I invite Dr. Vivek Benegal to speak to us. He's a psychiatrist, and he has been for a long time with the with NIMHANS, which is in Bangalore, right? Which is the country's leading institution where research, teaching, etc. happens in the field of mental health, where he's a professor. And he particularly specializes in the study of alcohol addiction and the problems arising therefrom. And since this has always been a major concern as far as men are concerned, and the various pathologies to which they are prone, alcoholism has been one of the major ones. So this is the context of his presentation.
Thank you. First of all, let me confess that I'm the odd person out. I'm not really, cued on to the general discourse that is predominant here. But I actually, as I was introduced, I'm a psychiatrist, and I work in alcohol studies. Alcohol in the construct of masculinities is important because it's the quintessential. Drinking alcohol and drinking large amounts of alcohol is the quintessential male signature, so to speak, and more so in India, and which is why I put up this thing. I drink, therefore I'm a man. Now I wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at how recent changes in the last part of the 20th century and this current century have shaped some of the difficulties and how alcohol has played a role in that narrative. I mean, you're the guys who do all the work on economic changes, so I'm not really going to lecture you about the economic changes that have occurred, except to say that it has resulted in, as the last speaker also talked about, a lot of mobility and migration. And we have young people in most of our cities and in rural areas who are detached from family supports. So what that has meant is that there has been a loss of psychological cushions. The traditional psychological cushions that were there in the family and in the traditional social structures. And this has also meant that there is a loss of restraint regarding social norms. There are certain things that you could do and you couldn't do in your hometown. Whereas when you come out and you stay somewhere else, all the bets are off. You can do so many things. And sometimes this itself becomes a major challenge. There is side-by-side increased competition, depleting resources, and so there are challenges for livelihood, challenges for habitats, difficulties in relationships, and with the changing gender ratios, there is a difficulty vis-a-vis availability of partners for sexual intimate relationships, and most of all, in our shrinking spaces, in our shrinking rural and urban spaces, there is a difficulty in accessing leisure and positive stimulation. Now, that causes people to live in more and more threatening, alien living and working spaces. And this gives rise to a whole cluster of negative moods, frustration, anger, sadness, threat, and the worst of them all, boredom. Side by side, there have been other social changes. And one really can't put a value to it, saying that these are positive or negative, but there has been increased and visible, I didn't mean but there, but there has been increased and visible empowerment of women, there has been changing roles, including that of individualism. There have been changing perception of aspirations, changing needs. What do we require? And this is related to things like satellite television, it's related to the internet, it's related to a whole host of things. And there is a mismatch between people's aspiration and the ability to derive what they may want. So this gives, you completes the cluster. For there is an absence of coherence, an absence of belonging, and there's a growing sense of perceived skewness of the social order. The things are not right. I am not getting my just dues. So what is this, I wanted to invoke a very, very old philosophical terminology called anomie. Anomie is characterized by an absence of norms or values, or the erosion of the normal norms and values. And this is a very, very old terminology. And the deviance arises out of the discrepancy between a society's social goals and the supply of legitimate means to achieve these goals. And people without means to achieve these goals have to resort to different tactics than people who have these means. Now, so what are the outcomes? In the individual, the mind seeks order, structure, and sense in this dystopia. So you go out seeking a powerful leader, you try to find purpose in groups, you want to find someone to blame, you have to restore stability by enforcing or restoring power equations, and targets are often foreigners, misfits, women, etc. And this is something that has been seen in societies across cultures. And obviously, so you have things like this, people raiding drinking places in Bangalore and in other places. It's here where, I call it the many uses of drinking. Here where alcohol use seems to segue into this, because alcohol use has a lot of meanings for people. Number one is, especially in the Indian context, where men and women drink alcohol for different reasons, and men and women drink alcohol differently, it has a shared expectancy. It's shared across cultural of disinhibition and violence. It is expected that people who drink will get disinhibited and violent. Both men and women expect it, women expect it much more. There are expectancies of heightened sexuality attached to drinking of alcohol. There are expectancies of it being therapeutic, antidepressant, anti-anxiety, and anti-boredom. And there is this aspirational value and normalization of use that is occurring in Indian society vis-a-vis alcohol. And this is most seen in the alcohol ads that you see in the 1980s and the 1970s. Alcohol ads, which we could only show in booth shops, featured buxom women in tight, skimpy clothes. It has since shifted to depicting young people, I'm not going to quote the actual words, I'll get sued for that, but about the joy of living. And so it is targeted at an audience which is young men and women. And side by side, we need to also understand that alcohol allows biologically, because of its biological properties, a lowering of guard, disinhibition, and what we call alcoholic myopia. When you drink, you tend to focus more and more on things, and things get very important. You know, anyone who's had a drunken argument, knows that nobody backs up, because that is the most important thing in life. So it allows for rapid, shallow pseudo-socialization, and the urgency and enlargement of the topic that one is discussing becomes very, very important. And this often gets people to do things, and which is why when you look at incidents of violence, etc., you find that alcohol has often been a trigger in some of these incidents. Now, alcohol, as I said, becomes a very, very important issue in anomic societies. I'm not going to labor the point, but working class men, and this is a study which was done in Russia and it's been done in several other places, but you find that working class men who lack institutional power need to go and construct their masculinity. They don't have power. So how do you construct a state where you have power? And without access to traditional forms of patriarchal power, they attempt to claim some type of power by heavy alcohol use and violence which is associated with it. Just as an example, you don't have to really go through it. This is a study that we did several years back in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, where there are two groups of people who are both of tribal origins and therefore and have had traditional alcohol use, which means that they brew their own alcohol and the drinking is fairly well normalized in their societies. One was the Nicobaris, who were from the islands, who had land rights, who were normalized in that in the land and in that social structure. And another group that we studied were what is called the Ranchi tribe. These are people who were indentured labor, who were brought in from Chotanagpur area, but they had no land rights. They had no rights, even rights which the Constitution guarantees for people, from scheduled tribes. When we looked at the drinking patterns in these two groups, mind you, both of them were traditional drinking societies, we found the patterns of drinking in the Ranchi tribe who lived in an anomic society was far more dangerous, far more harmful, with much more violence, much more sexual violence associated with drinking than in the Nicobaris tribes. And that is a point that I thought I'd bring about, that when a society is in ferment, sometimes alcohol becomes the engine of social destruction. Okay, the side by side in India, there is this other thing that the way we look at alcohol. For example, the only four groups of people who traditionally drink, are thought to drink, are the poor and the primitive. It's okay if they can drink. The privileged can drink, and the perverted. So so any other drinking outside this particular space is seen as abnormal. So the drinking itself becomes something which is hidden, and so the normal way of drinking in Indian society by Indian males is to go hide behind a liquor shop, open up a bottle and finish up 180 milliliters in 2 gulps, and then go and beat their wives and children, because this is expected, this is embedded in the way we construct alcohol in our social systems. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to also talk about is that this doesn't help us solve problems, it actually marginalizes the whole issue, because we don't want to talk about these things. So males drink. What are the expectancies related to alcohol? Males drink, women don't. Intoxication is the desired outcome of drinking. It's okay to drink in bars, but not in family circumstances. Men can get drunk more than women. Drinking is normatively associated with disinhibition, loud behavior, and violence. And this whole thing legitimizes male drunkenness and violence after drinking. And obviously this relates to larger prevalence of intimate partner violence, especially in families where one person is drinking. It leads to harms to strangers. And this is a study that we did recently in 10 states of India, where we looked at okay, we understand that, family members of people who have heavy drinking get hurt. But what we found was really fascinating, that the number of people who catch on the street who don't know anybody who's drinking, but who got hurt by somebody who had alcohol was pretty significant. And of course, yeah. So I'm just going to end by saying that what we need to see is how. Oh, there's one point that I wanted to make, that whenever we try and do programs which is related to drinking, related to welfare, etc., we exclude men from governmental and non-governmental programs. And I wanted to bring this up, that this does not seem to be a very helpful trend, because you have a group of sullen men who do not cooperate and who prove to be impediments to most of these programs. And that's how I work with most NGOs, because they come in and say, look, what do we do with the men? They are holding back our programs. So I'll stop there, and thank you.
Since Dr. Benjamin has to leave early, in his case, I think we will take questions now, but they can only be, we don't have much time. So there are
So thank you for your presentation. It was really nice. I come from a district called Kutch, which is very interior to Gujarat, and Gujarat is perhaps the only dry state. But we have had a huge amount of campaigns against alcohol, but somehow we are still grappling with the fact that how do we actually initiate the behavior change? Because that is the only option that we think could change this behavior. So if you can throw some insights on that.
Gujarat is not really a dry state. 16% of men drink, 5% of women drink.
Technically it's a dry state.
I mean, we did the only epidemiological study there recently.
Yeah.
But, your question was, how do we bring about change?
Behavioral change in people who are consuming alcohol, and which is leading to violence in most of the cases.
Well, I think number one is we need to really get out of this discourse where we have only bipolar discourse, which is vice versus the fact that alcohol brings in money, etc. What gets missed in the whole alcohol discourse is the fact the health aspect gets missed. And one of the things that has shown to be helpful is using a public health model to deal with it, is using the fact that dealing with people who have early problems related to alcohol, who come in to see a doctor, and doing interventions there. Those are things which are very, very helpful. Unfortunately, we've never ever looked at the public health interventions for alcohol in India.
Yeah.
So I would think that we put our money in things like that.
It is also a district where there is no de-addiction center. So
Again, the problem with alcohol, only 4% of people in India have alcoholism and need to go to a de-addiction center. 35% of people in India have alcohol-related problems, don't need to go to a de-addiction center, are not addicted, but cause the maximum number of problems and cause maximum amount of health and economic problems.
I have problems with some of the generalities which expressed in your presentation. One is that there are many tribal communities where men and women drink very regularly, like probably in western or northern countries, and also people farming communities of some type. There is no percentage, very low percentage of alcoholism in them. So how can you make some generalization on that basis? First, one second. And about working class, I worked with working class, particularly sexual workers. I have seen that you cannot say that their masculinity is connected, there is very high percentage of alcoholism in working class. I didn't find that. Because even though they were single men, their women were in their villages, still this percentage are very, very low.
I can answer the first one. I was saying exactly the same thing that you're saying, that it is among certain tribal societies, alcohol use is normalized and fairly relatively less harmful. However, in a tribal society which lived in an anomic stage, there was much more alcohol-related harm than a similar tribal society in the same geography who was more wedded to the land, who had more rights, etc. So I agree 100% with what you're saying. About the second part about, these are observations that we've made through studies, so we can discuss that. We can take it offline and discuss.
Dr. Basu, that will be the last question.
So I do have a question.
No, what's it?
Very quick. I was really taken with, we were having this discussion in the plenary this morning, right? That of things, the way you started, right, which connects to also the trade union stuff, of how it's part of a broader sort of migration, displacement, enemy, to use your word. But I understood you to say, right, just because you sort of went through the conclusions fast, that actually what you want to address is to take away, not to stop drinking particularly, right, but to take away the stigma and secrecy and, the idea of disinhibition and, just
So it's the explanatory model that needs to be handled rather than prohibit everything below the ground, and which is what is happening, and unfortunately also happening in Kerala, where I'm going to just now.
anti-campaign.
Yes, and that doesn't help. That is one of the things that does not help.
Absolutely the last question.
I don't need a mic. Sir, I'm from Jammu Kashmir, and my question is like, जैसे कि आपने कहा कि जब शराब पीते हैं तो आपको पता है कि हमारे यहाँ आर्म फोर्सेस हैं, and they work under the record law like ASPA. और उस लॉ के अंदर जब वो शराब पीते हैं, उसके बाद वो एक वायलेंस उस लेवल पे आते हैं जहाँ पे वो वायलेंट हो जाते हैं. What are the measures that we can take कि हम उनको काउंसिल करें कि वो शराब ना पिएं? What can be the measures? How can we counsel them? That's what I actually want to ask. Because वहाँ पे perpetrator भी in an armed forces and it's really difficult. So what do you suggest? How do we counsel them?
Well, the army has its own groups who are supposed to look at this particular issue. How civilians will counsel army persons, I'm at a loss. I don't think I have an answer.
No, basically, like you have the NGOs, you have the other organizations who work on the ground level. If they want to counsel them, because the victim of violence is always, public. So if women take the initiative of counseling, then how do we do that?
Well, there are standard ways. I can't sit here and talk about, how counseling needs to be done. I don't get your, I don't think I understood your question. I'm sorry.
Sir, मेरा सवाल ये था कि हम उनको कैसे counsel करें?
कैसे?
How can police and how can army be counseled if in the army campuses only?
No, the army and the police have gotten quite conscious about the fact that this is happening, and in fact they've reached out to some of us to put in institutional remedies. They can, as you know, that they will not do it in a civil thing. They will do it through the army and the police.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Benedict. So now we move on to the next presentation, and I would like to invite Professor Aris Deshpande to speak to us. He is a leading scholar in the field of agricultural economics. He has recently retired as director of the the Institute for Social and Economic Change in Bangalore, which is a major research institution, and specifically he has worked on and published extensively on the question of farmer suicide, which is a major problem that has been affecting this country's agrarian sector over the last decade or so. So I think that's going to be the focus of this presentation.
Actually, I would not be speaking about farmer suicide as such, but rural distress. My engagement with rural distress goes back to 1972 drought, and where I was working without even having an iota of idea about masculinity and its implications or repercussions. I recollected back the story from 1972 onwards. 72 drought was a devastating drought in central India. And this drought, I recollected the instances when I was doing my fieldwork, my first job as research assistant in Marathwada and a part of Karnataka. I recollected that there exactly certain things that have that can be observed as the rural presence of masculinity. First thing, what I observed was the commodification of human being in 1972 drought. Till then, the women were not used as a commodity in those regions which I visited. And this was used mainly by the people who had to save their ego or their prestige in the village. First time in Sholapur district, the wife of a Deshmukh is a community which is high echelon community among Marathas, something like Sharad Pawar's community. Wife of a Deshmukh had to go for the field work or for the work on the drought alleviation. This was something which had never happened in the place earlier. Second, not only the household items were sold, the children were sold, girls were sold, and this I recollected back who had done it. And I go back to largely this happened from the strong households in the villages who wanted to protect the face of the house. I come to the next. Initially, the women of the house, and then the girl or the child of the house, and then the baby of the house. In fact, the price of the baby was also decided during the drought. So distress, it gives rise to human perversion. And one of the component of the human perversion is masculinity. I take you further. There are strong cultural residuals in rural areas. Urban areas, they look at change and they accept the change very fast. Rural areas, the residual of the culture and especially the objectionable part of the culture, it stays lingering for ages. Whether it is Bethle Seve in Karnataka, which means that the scheduled caste women have to go naked to worship the goddess. And when it was banned by the government, this was done clandestinely by the men of the villages. Or Katebaras in your region. These are the things which do not change very easily. So also, the macho-ness or the masculinity of the men. When Durkheim, my earlier speaker Vivek had talked about anomy. When Durkheim looked into suicides, he looked into 4 components. Number 1, anomic suicide. 2, endemic. 3, egoistic. And 4, altruistic. He did not really come across, being a sociologist, that egoistic is the most dominant category. Egoistic and altruistic are the most dominant category. And when the farmer suicides have taken place in the central India, and I had done the study for central India, for Maharashtra, Karnataka, Punjab and Andhra Pradesh. When we look at the suicides and 132 families when I visited, one of the important things that comes into picture is that the man of the household who commits suicide mainly because he would like to prove that he is a man and he cannot tolerate the insult. Being so, he inflicts the insult on the family and leaves the family in the lurch. There is a study, post-suicide study, were taken in a few districts, and it's in fact pathetic that the households in which the men had committed suicide, neither the land was transferred to the woman, nor the woman has been given the wherewithal to survive. And many of them had to go to their parents' houses, leaving the husband's house. The impact of the macho-ness, and I'll give you 2 case studies quickly. The impact of this macho-ness or masculinity felt by the person, by that man, is everlasting on the family, and especially the sufferers are, and there is a very interesting case. The boys are kept back. If the lady has two children, 1 boy and 1 girl, boy is kept back and girl is sent along with the mother to the parents' house. Something which is the incidental suffering is for the girls or the females of the house. In addition to that, there is the terminology used in entire Maharashtra, Karnataka, especially the border areas of our Yajmana. The money, the household, the head of the household. The head of the household is essentially a man, even though the women of the house are carrying, and I have seen Yajmana of 14 years old boy. He is the head of the household. But then the entire work is carried out by the women. The land is not on their name. Land is on the name of that Yajmana. I give you 2 very interesting cases. One is a Jangama. It's near Dharwad. This man has married in the house of the girl. He is Mane Aliya, which means Ghar Jamai. He is married in the house of the wife. He doesn't have any estate, he doesn't have any assets in his side. So he comes and stays in the father-in-law's here, mother-in-law's place, because father-in-law is not alive. Land is in the name of mother-in-law. And land is in the name of wife. This Jangama is a person who rather keeps himself busy in puja, patha, this, that. Jangama is like Brahmin in Lingayats, among Lingayats. Puja, patha, and he doesn't cultivate. Wife is the only one who cultivates the land, who takes the entire burden of cultivation, everything, and that year was a bad year, and she also suffered losses, income was lower, and she had some argument with this man. The only thing what she said was that being a man, you do not cultivate. And this fellow jumped tank. The problem is that neither he did anything for the house, but then left the house in the lurch. She continued her cultivation business. The another thing, and I am very happy that Vivek had stated that before I stated it. One of the important criteria of being masculine is drinking. Largely 132, and that's why our report of Karnataka was highly criticized. More or less every household, every victim was an alcohol addict. Why do they become alcohol addict? His first thing is that, he also stated it, the ambitions and the capabilities do not match. And the ambitions are, मैं तो मर्द हूँ, मैं करके बताऊंगा. I am a man, I will show it. And undertakes tomato cultivation. He doesn't know much. And he knows that next year tomato is going to drop down because the price had increased this year. Next year onion prices are going down. And this is a cycle in agriculture always. मैं करके बताऊंगा, and they undertake certain cultivation practices. Borewell एक नहीं लगा है borewell. If there is no one borewell, I will have second, I will have third. मैं तो मर्द हूँ, मैं करके बताऊंगा. And that I am a man. The second case study is that of a army retired. I am not completely agreeing with retired because he came back and I couldn't see any evidence of his pension. He was either thrown out of the army or he was medically unfit. But he came back. See, being an army man, being a landowner, and with a mustache, and a drunkard, this is complete picture of rural masculinity. That man is supposed to be the man. The rest of the people are there. This man came back from the army, he was in artillery, he came back and he was not receiving any pension, so he started borrowing in order to cultivate. But he never cultivated, he had unfortunately incurred lot of debts. Fortunately for one thing he did, he incurred debt and got some job for his wife. The bankman came to ask him to pay. He was not cultivating, he was not doing anything, so there was no money. His wife borrowed from her brother and gave it to the bank fellow. Brother, next Ugadi, the New Year day, the brother was at home and he said that last year you borrowed the money, you have not returned a single paisa. Why are you not returning? And wife said, "You to khud ko army ka samajhte ho. You consider yourself as a man mature. You are an ex-army man. Return his money." Finished. The fellow committed suicide without doing anything. Neither he was a cultivator, nor he cultivated, nor he looked after the. And it was just the macho-ness or masculinity stuck inside the brain brought down the family. And more or less, most of the families which I have visited, not necessarily majority, but many of the families which I visited have this problem of ill-founded masculinity, and that's something which is there present in rural areas. I think Kulkarni was looking into his watch, and I also finished it. I think one of the things which is coming up, and that last point, one of the things which is coming up is the commodification of the human beings, and that is happening exactly in the area which are largely distressful, especially all the flesh trade that goes to Mumbai goes from a few districts of Karnataka and Maharashtra. They are not Mumbai born children, they are not Mumbai born girls, they are from the Mofussil areas. Which are these areas? These are the rural distressed areas, and there a girl is used as a commodity, as a cash, and that cash goes back to the family. And this is also an emancipation of being commodity or being the product of masculinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deshpande. So now that brings us to the last presentation. The speaker, Ms. Barkha Dutt, is well known here in India as a journalist. She is often on television, and she has been in this field for some decades, so she really doesn't need an introduction.
Thank you very much. Unlike everybody else here who has a lot of domain expertise, I speak very much as an observer and a reporter in terms of anecdotally. I can't offer empirical research, but I can certainly share what I've observed over the last 2 decades that I have been in journalism. And I'd like to start with the notions of masculinity and femininity within my profession itself. This is a very interesting thing because while no one would ever acknowledge that there are certain areas of news reporting that are considered masculine and certain areas of news reporting that are considered feminine, that hierarchy very much exists, and it is a hierarchy because the masculine areas of reportage are the ones that occupy prime time attention, are the ones that are at the top of the pecking order when it comes to news selection. And what do I mean by masculine areas? I mean areas like covering war, covering conflict, covering insurgency, covering politics, covering defense, military hardware. These are unspokenly the masculine areas of news coverage. What are the feminine areas? Well, typically human rights violations, the stories of the oppressed and marginalized, caste discrimination, gender. These are all areas that fall into the bucket that women journalists tend to cover. Now, one of the very interesting things that's happening, and I think that this leaves men in a sense, male journalists trapped in prisons that are never identified as prisons, is that you are seeing a movement of women into the masculine domain. So there are a number of women, I would include myself in that, who have now started reporting on areas that were once the domains of male journalists. And you will in fact see a flood of women, for example, covering Indian politics. But the reverse migration into the areas that are normally regarded as softer news has not happened at all. I know very, very few male journalists who are covering any of the areas that typically women have. So I think that raises a very interesting question about how, in a sense, the feminist discourses opened up more opportunities for women. I'm not saying that it's still not a misogynistic society in many ways, a misogynistic profession in many ways, but the fact of the matter is that as women get more assertive, there are many more opportunities that are opening up for women, but not as many opportunities that are opening up for men. So I think that's something interesting to consider. Now, the other thing that I have encountered in terms of masculinity and femininity, when we talk about machismo and masculinity, perhaps there is no better association with it than that of the soldier. It is considered the ultimate statement of masculinity. Now, in this context, I want to share my own experience, which made me confront my own traps of femininity and masculinity, and also the traps that I found very young soldiers in. As some of you know, in 1999, I was at the front line of the Kargil war, covering the war as it was happening. And I had never covered a war before. I was only in my mid-20s. I didn't know what to expect. I also had very sort of theoretical assumptions of what soldiers are like, what the military is like, what bravery is all about, what courage is all about. And then I land up here as a relatively young person, and I see that at the front of this war are men. They were all men, because women are not allowed into combat. Men even younger than myself, and they were expected to sort of lead this front against Pakistan without any sense of vulnerability. That their whole valor was expected to be defined without any sense of vulnerability, although they were actually just young boys. I mean, they were in their early 20s, some of them were not even married, some of them had got engaged to be married. And there was this one instance when the shelling was very heavy, and I had a chance we were pushed underground into this bunker, and I was the only woman amongst maybe about 15 men, and we were in a space maybe not even 1/4 of this room, a really tiny bunker, and it's accelerated intimacy of strangers as happens in these situations. We all got talking, and we got very attached to this army unit because they had, in a sense, saved our lives by pushing us into the refuge of the bunker. Now, it is in this conversation that I actually discovered how vulnerable, how there was a soft side to these men who were not allowed to even display this vulnerability because they felt it ran antithetical to their entire training. And to some extent I understood that. But then I also discovered that in this ultimate assertion of masculinity, and I can't think of one that is more intense, you did have vulnerability which did not in any way detract from the valor. But in their self-image, they were very, very frightened of admitting to the vulnerability because they felt that it took away from decades of training that had put them as soldiers in the first place. Now, another very interesting thing happened after that. This same unit that had saved our lives was asked to go up for another assault. And we had got quite attached to them. So it was time to say goodbye. They had to go up and we had to go on with our job. And please remember that there were a few male journalists there. There were soldiers who were all men, and there was me, the only woman, in this little closet-sized bunker. And when the time came to say goodbye, we found that all the male journalists had tears in their eyes. They were crying openly. One or two of the soldiers were crying as well. And the person who had difficulty crying was me. Because I felt that I would be identified as too much of a girl in a war front. That if I cried, then my femininity, in a sense, would be used against me. And the backdrop, of course, is that when I had wanted to go and cover the war, the army had initially said that women are not allowed at the front. There'll be all kinds of practical problems. So I was very self-conscious about not being gendered in my responses. And I found, interestingly, that the men, because they didn't feel that pressure, the male journalists at least, they were able to cry openly when they were leaving these friends that we had made at the war front. So that's just another interesting anecdotal account. The last couple of points I'd like to make is that I feel that women themselves often are the worst perpetrators of what is feminine, of celebrating these gender stereotypes. And what do I mean by that? It's become fashionable today to say that women are more compassionate, women professionals are better at multitasking, women are better at building consensus. Now there's a problem with women giving themselves, according to me, these kind of compliments, because the moment you accept some gender stereotypes, if you're going to accept some stereotypes about yourself that are positive, it's a corollary that the negative stereotypes are going to follow. And you're also reconfirming that men in positions of power are different from women, that men are more aggressive, that men are less given to consensus building, that men are not great team leaders. So I have a problem with women, in a sense, reiterating by complimenting themselves in the name of gender assertion, in a sense stereotyping men. And the fourth and last point that I'd like to briefly leave you all with is a story that's playing out on the television channels today and yesterday. Is the story of of women who have died in sterilization camps in Chhattisgarh. Now, this could be a medical debate about whether the doctor was performing too many surgeries. I believe one surgery every 4 minutes. But it's also a gender debate, because I think it reminds you that in the India of 2014, the onus is still on women to do birth control, and sterilization is, I mean, one could even be encouraging non-invasive forms of family planning, like over-the-counter contraceptives or condoms. But the fact of the matter is that women are not able to make their choices, and you have 500 rupees being dangled as an incentive for poor women to enroll for these sterilization programs. So I think we really have to step back and see that while there's a churn happening, the churn has really left vast masses of this population completely untouched. And especially when it comes to reproductive rights, the discourse is completely gendered along the most conservative lines. So those are just some thoughts I'd like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess now we have about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so she has to leave in another 5 to 7 minutes. Maybe she can take the questions first, and then you can ask questions to others, Mr. Pakinter.
You said that the men are stereotyped in the name of their masculinity. So, do you want to say that it is not their masculinity that they are attacking? It is not in their masculinity that they are domineering, but it is something different. So, women also can have the same characters. So, why we are calling them masculine because of these characters? That's what you want to say. And if that you want to say, then it creates many other problems. What remains of masculinity?
I do question the entire notion of what is masculine and what is feminine. I do believe that it is, while the nature-nurture debate will never get fully resolved, I do believe that these are social constructs. And I do believe that women have walked into a potential trap by attributing some traits to themselves that they believe flow from their gender, but not wanting other, so we are perfectly willing to say, oh, we are women, so we are so much better at A. But tomorrow if a man turns around and tells us you're women, but therefore you're not so good at B, we're immediately going to say it's a gender bias. So I feel that women are completely embracing this trap of masculinity and femininity by celebrating what they call the feminine traits of consensus building, of being more peaceable, etc. Because sooner or later somebody will turn around and give a negative attribute also based on your gender. So my personal opinion is that we need to shy away from these social constructs, that people are people before they are men and women. There is an aggressive person, not an aggressive man or an aggressive woman, and I do not accept this. I lean more on the side of nurture in the nature versus nurture debate. I see many of these traits as social constructs that have been embedded into our systems.
I think sort of building on your point, I think I agree with you on the nature-nurture debate. And building on this, I mean, do you see this nurture side of things and alternative masculinities and things? So I'm from England, at the University of Oxford. We watched the Hard Talk after 377 and things. And for a lot of people working on gender there, that was one of these alternative masculine spaces that was opening up in India, and a very positive development. Do you see that being changed, or in the media, or in images of media? We've had sessions on the media. What is your take on this, on sort of the alternative masculinities, the potential for this, and the threatened spaces that exist now?
I think the space is opening up. I think despite the setback for the gay community in the Supreme Court, the fact is that there is a greater social space opening up for what you call alternative masculinity. But I do not think that it has managed to challenge the very embedded notions of what men are supposed to be like and what women are supposed to be like, at least in the large mass of heterosexual society. And therefore, you will find that this is anecdotal and I can't prove it, but I do find many more heterosexual women absolutely comfortable with the idea of alternative sexuality and alternative masculinity than heterosexual men. And if you ask a heterosexual man, he will say, well, yeah, I have no problems with them. They can make their own choices, but you can see a certain discomfort. And I've always wondered whether it interferes with their own self-image and the men that they're expected to be. So I do think that the space is opening up, but I think that the entrenched hold of what men are expected to be remains very strong.
Yeah.
I quite agree with you. The kind of the issues that you raised, in the media houses, what kind of news is done by, what is the masculine side and what is the feminine side, who goes to the field where. So, do we see new emerging strategies within the, are there any, we can say positive deviance within the media houses? Are there any strategies being taken up to deal with these issues? Or like these are as it is, as they are?
See, I think every journalist, man or woman, wants to cover the story that will get them the maximum profile and mileage. It's actually not a gendered choice. I think that as long as news hierarchies continue to play up, let's say politics or war or conflict, what's considered hard news over the soft news, which is development stories or human rights stories, both men and women who aspire to reach a certain place in their profession will gravitate towards the hard news. Are there strategies to change this? No, I don't think so. I think the positive side, as I've said, has been the churn where women are able to enter this space. But I always say, for example, in politics, I find it completely strange that it's always a woman who's the Minister for Women and Child Development, right? I mean, as long as you have only women looking out for issues related to women, the ministry is just a quota filling kind of space. So similarly in news, you can't push this in a gendered way. The fact of the matter is that any ambitious professional will want to do what she or he thinks they will derive maximum mileage from. So I do feel also that when we have to acknowledge, and this happens in politics also, you expect more women to come into politics change. Women come into politics and have actually exactly the same compulsions than men do. So I think it's no different for women journalists. It's exactly the same compulsions. Sorry, please excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to leave early, but I've got to back to work.
Fine. So, if you have questions for any of the other speakers, please ask them. You could also offer comments, of course.
I was going to ask a big question. So, I think again, since the morning plenary, maybe we've been talking about sort of structural problems, right? And capitalism, what were we calling it? Corporate, what was that word? Corporate patriarchy, what was it? So, corporate globalization. But also, is patriarchy changing because of globalization or not? I thought it was interesting that across your two talks, in trade union movement, you sort of suggested that economic distress made women more, made patriarchy less, no? And women more go into things, made women adopt new roles, right? But Professor Deshpande talked about a hardening of gender relations or the increase in patriarchy in times of crisis. Yeah?
In times of crisis.
In times of crisis. So, yeah, but I thought it's interesting that it might, it might take different directions. So I just wanted to listen. And anybody else would talk about that too.
Very good.
Yes.
Take at the end.
Right.
Two questions questions to Professor Deshpande. One is that as far as my information is concerned, this is a minor question, but as far as my information is concerned, Sharad Pawar is from the Maratha standards, is not from highly placed Maratha family. Is not. There are intercaste relation, marriage and etc. Things are there. So he is not landlord family. That's where my information goes. That doesn't mean that he is a good Maratha, but he is not from landlord family. Yeah, he was. Secondly, you think that it is a height of masculinity that makes people commit suicide. And it is lack of masculinity that no woman has committed suicide because of the land going back, their land economy going bankrupt. Because that is the fact. As you said, and as many studies go, that women in that family, no woman has committed suicide for that reason. So that is one question. Second question. To Dattaji, I would ask that how many people who are going to get houses, किती लोक आहेत असे की जे तिथे राहून म्हणजे जसे कोकणस्थ तिथे राहिलेलेच असतात, देशस्थ कामगारांच्या स्त्रिया पूर्वीपासूनच गावी होत्या, ते एकटे इकडे होते, तर यापैकी किती लोक त्या घरातून वस्ती करणार आहेत, असं काही आपल्याकडे सर्वे आहे का?
अभी जो सभी ने क्लेम किया है तो 1.5 लाख लोगों ने घर के लिए एप्लीकेशन दिए और सरकार ने प्रिंसिपली मान्य किया है कि सबको हम घर देंगे। इसमें एक सवाल आता है कि बहुत सारे बम्बई में रहते हैं, उनके पास घर है, तो उनको तो ये बोनस ऐसे मिल रहा है कि ये घर, तो शायद हो सकता है वो नए घर में आए और अपना घर रेंट पे दे, ये एक बात हो सकती है। दूसरी बात है कि जो गाँव में रहते हैं, देहात में रहते हैं, तो उनके लिए भी घर मिल रहा है, तो शायद वो कैसे शिफ्ट होगा। तो एक सरकार ने इसको दिया, इसमें एक प्रोविजन किया है कि वो रेंट पे दे सकते हैं, तो बुढ़ापे में उनको एक 15,000 रुपया ऐसा सैलरी मिल सकता है, उसका बच्चा पढ़ाई करता है तो बाद में वो बम्बई में शिफ्ट हो सकता है। तो मेजोरिटी लोग तो अपने ये नहीं बेच रहे, कुछ लोग बेच ही रहे क्योंकि मिल मजदूर के लड़के भी अभी पढ़े लिखे हो गए। जैसे मैंने आपको बोला कि एक लड़का अभी पायलट हो गया, तो वो छोटे घर में कैसा रहेगा, तो बेचेगा शायद, तो इसका एक एसेट तो मिल गया। लेकिन हमारा क्या कहना है कि ये जीत है हमारी कि हमने लैंड पाया मालिकों से, इसका नयापन है। नहीं तो अभी देखो इंडस्ट्री में होता है ऐसे कि जब भी अपना लीगल ड्यूज मिलते हैं तो अपना रिलेशन खत्म होता है, मालिक और अपना रिलेशन कुछ भी नहीं का एज पर लॉ। तो ये एक नयापन ऐसा है कि हमने लैंड शेयरिंग किया, तो मुझे लगता है उस तरह हम लोग उसको देखते हैं।
I did not answer the question because I will take the questions at the end.
Fine.
I would not simultaneously answer because that will take longer time.
Just very quickly, what was the exchange was like this. So he said that the mill workers who lost their jobs many years ago, that because of the union struggle, they have been given houses, about 150,000 of them have been given houses, he says, and those who do not need to occupy them immediately can even rent them out, and that will be a source of income to them. So this is basically a major victory.
I have मतलब मेरा दत्ता जी से कुछ सवाल है, बल्कि इंक्वायरी है। एक तो आपने ये बताया कि इस पूरे मूवमेंट में जब आप चला रहे थे मिल वर्कर्स के साथ, और उसमें काफ़ी बड़ी संख्या में महिलाएं थी, नहीं तो, और फिर आपने ये भी बताया कि उस संघर्ष में आपकी जीत हुई और वो कुछ लैंड का हिस्सा मिला और मकान बनाने की अनुमति मिली। तो यहाँ पे इंटरेस्टिंग ये होगा कि क्या उन घरों में कितने घर ऐसे होंगे जो लोगों ने महिलाओं के नाम पे हुए हैं, क्योंकि संघर्ष में तो साथ रहे, लेकिन जब बात आई कि उसको रिसोर्सेज के ऊपर ओनरशिप है, तो उसमें क्या एक तो यूनियन के लेवल पे क्या भूमिका थी, क्या महिलाओं की लीडरशिप थी उसमें? सोल्जर तो हो सकती है महिलाएं, क्या लीडर और आइडियोलॉग हो सकती हैं? एक तो इस लेंस से देखने वाली बात है। दूसरा, क्या वाकई में उनके पास जमीनें आई, घरों के मालिकाना हक आए, और उसमें आप कैसे देखते हैं इस पूरे स्ट्रक्चर को?
I think after this the last question and then responses from the speakers, because it's almost.
This is a minor question to Mr. Deshpande. While citing the
example of the suicide from the ex-military man. I mean, you said it was a case of ill-founded masculinity. Do you mean to imply that it's good or well-founded masculinity?
It's not necessary that every concept has a complement. He is a good man does not mean that he was a bad man earlier.
So,
I just one is Bharat's second. The thing is that it is not necessary. It's not necessary that the suicides are committed mainly because of the strong feeling of masculinity. It's a chain kind of sequence, and I have argued all through that there cannot be a single reason for suicide. Technology is as important reason as much as the feeling of macho-ness. Failure of irrigation or going the groundwater table going down is as much the reason as much the new seeds or the unfortunately bad seeds or the failure of extension. So it's something like a large number of them. But one thing which gets into is the inequality between ambition and capability. That the person is capable to achieve certain things and his ambition, that he takes a technology or he takes a particular thing and fails. Second thing which Vivek had stated is the failure of the social system. Today the village is totally disintegrated as against the village which I saw. I visited the village where I was born recently. The village is so disintegrated that my close friends, they do not know the other fellow's house. It was such a small place. He doesn't know the other fellow's house. I don't know where he stays. They were close friends when we were in schools. So it's this disintegration of the village is one of the things. Of course, that cannot be connected with masculinity straight away. But one of the important reasons is that feeling of macho-ness. मैं घर का मर्द आदमी हूँ, मैं तो करके बताऊंगा, and that feeling is somewhere at the root. You had asked something, ma'am?
I asked if capitalism makes patriarchy worse or better.
It depends on what kind of capitalism, the quality of capitalism. And the quality of capitalism in rural areas is largely tends to reconstruct or concretize the patriarchy. Whereas capitalism in the urban areas and the kind of neo-capitalism, it does not necessarily strengthens patriarchy. In fact, it allows feminine participation strongly as against in rural areas. The moment capital gets into rural areas, patriarchy strengthens strongly.
Okay, thanks.
एक सवाल था वो वही था कि इसमें क्या था कि जो मजदूर काम करते हैं उनको ही देते हैं, तो अगर वो मजदूर मर गया समझो तो उसको वाइफ को मिलता है।
अगर वाइफ मजदूर
हाँ तो उनको तो मिलता है, हाँ उनको घर मिलते ही है। जो बहुत सारे यानी 1%, 2.5 लाख में 1% वो महिलाएं थी।
Is vice versa also true कि अगर औरत वर्कर है तो
उनको घर
मिलेगा?
नहीं, अभी क्या होगा, वो तो घर उनके नाम पे ही आएगा, वो औरतों के नाम पे ही आ जाएगा। उसके बाद में वो क्या करना है वो तय करेगी ना। समझो एक महिला काम कर रही है तो उसको जब घर मिलेगा तो अलॉटमेंट उनके नाम पे ही होती है, क्योंकि वो रिलेशन वही है ना, नहीं तो किसको। और उनकी मालिक बन जाते हैं वो घर पे, तो उनके नाम पे ही हो जाता है। ऐसा नहीं कि वो समझो मर गया तो दूसरे को देना, ऐसा नहीं।
So basically, I think what he's saying is that the house is in the name of the worker, be it male worker or female worker. And in case of a male worker, of course, if he dies, then it is obviously transferred to his wife. That's what he's saying. So we aim, but as we aim, this is of course a very motley set of concerns that were addressed, and not necessarily in a very structured kind of a way. But that was the whole idea. Idea was to, and in fact, the idea of the global symposium is to open up this Pandora's box of masculinity and masculinity. But I think one of the issues that came up is there such a thing as well-founded masculinity? I think that is an abiding concern of this conference. Otherwise, this conference has no basis. There should, because if we have, of course, there are many people who are into deconstruction and so on. They believe that we need to completely do away with these categories of masculinities, etc., and just see the kind of more polymorphous mode of existence where these identities don't really matter, or if they matter, that will be in a very different way. Those inspired by Judith Butler and others, they think like this. But I think even suppose that is the ideal, I think we have a long way to go. Meanwhile, we have to find our way across this terrain which is currently constituted in terms of certain given categories. At this stage, perhaps even looking for some kind of well-founded masculinity might be a good idea, perhaps, on the way. Okay, so let me thank all the speakers and all the participants here. And we bring the session to
Hi. So was the answer to the question 1%? Was the answer to the question 1%?
Actually, I want to extend your question. Localization means marketization. In which case, if you resell your products, you cannot actually it's structured.
Excuse me, what was your question?
My question is, he has stated that women at the forefront of the struggle and all that. So that is fine. I mean, that is your construct, and that is what you have been celebrating. Now, please do tell us, when you won the struggle, and the houses are being built, so how did you deal with that? How many women got these allotments? Whether there are allotments which are being made in the name of women, even when the husbands, because when the husband did not fight, the women went and fight. So technically it has to go to men. But did you make any effort within the organization that okay, husband did not fight, but this women fight, so let us, give the house to the women. So he said, no, it cannot be done because if the mill worker is a husband, so houses go to him. So, I mean, that's the way. But my problem was that within the problem even with the trade union structure is that ideologue will be a man and they will decide. So you can be a foot soldier, but when it comes to redistribution of resources, then the ideologue decides. And where you will see the underlayer where slowly you will see women just remain the foot soldiers and loser in that whole thing in redistribution of resources. And that has happened a lot. I mean, I have seen in lots of trade union things that is happening. I am witness to one of this kind of a movement in countryside area. It's in Chhattisgarh, which Barkha was telling about. There was a cotton mill which was closed down. It's a National Textile Corporation mill. The mill was closed down. It occupied huge land, and since most of the mill workers were unemployed, their wife picked up some odd jobs and were exploited also in those odd jobs, because in rural areas you necessarily do not get well-paid jobs. And now these men some of them were distressed, and because of their masculine ideas, they all got into heavy drinking or some other jobs. Now during the movement, they mobilized a lot of women and all that. But when it came to the distribution of resources, when it came like pensions and other benefits, suddenly you will see men coming into the forefront of it. So that struggle was still going on there. So I tried to recollect with that struggle that, in trade unionism itself is such a masculine space that you want women to come, but you don't want to share the fruits. And that's a problem. Maybe, I don't know, especially in India, I don't know about Europe, I guess everywhere this is the case. You want women to be there when you struggle, but don't want when you have to distribute the fruits or whatever struggle.
At least if the policies are not made.
Yeah.
Otherwise you say, we have no choice, we have to take them.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Centralize it to individual teams, then that gap Yes, it's very true. We are individuals who are not all so these will have to change, and that is also going to take institution changes, policy changes. All these are also being discussed. So, such as, for example,